My parents tried to take the house my grandmother left me, calling me ungrateful, unstable, and undeserving. But in fighting for that house, I discovered something far more powerful: myself. When I returned to my grandmother's house, the locks had changed. It was a cloudless morning, the sky a piercing blue that betrayed the storm inside me. I stood on the wraparound porch of the Victorian home where I'd spent every childhood summer, suitcase in hand, heart pounding. The brass key that had opened the front door for decades no longer fit. I turned it again, jiggled it, pressed my shoulder into the door as if sheer will might unlock it. But nothing. Just that quiet click of rejection. A part of me thought it had to be a mistake. That someone had changed the locks temporarily. That Jason, my older brother, had forgotten to inform me. But deep down, I knew. My grandmother had passed 3 weeks ago. The funeral had been small, intimate, and filled with silences that screamed. My parents hadn't made it. Business trip, they said. Jason had barely looked me in the eye at the service. I was the one who had been with her during those final months, the one who left behind a well-paying job in the city to care for her when the cancer came back. It was also the one she left the house to. I stepped back from the porch, heart racing. I fished out my phone and called Jason. Voicemail. I didn't bother with a message. Instead, I called my lawyer. Ashley, he answered, voice calm as ever. What's going on? The locks have been changed, I said. I can't get in. A pause. Papers rustled. No one was authorized to change them. The house was transferred to your name legally. I have the documents. So why can't I get into my own home? I'll find out. Give me a few hours. I sat on the porch swing, the one my grandmother used to sip tea on every morning. The wood creaked beneath me, familiar and strangely comforting. I stared out at the garden I'd helped her plant the summer I turned 12. Weeds now curled around the roses. It wasn't just a house. It was history. It was identity. It was home. Didn't cry. Not yet. My grandmother, Eleanor Parker, had been the backbone of our family, and the only person who made me feel like I belonged. Where my parents saw me as a disappointment, she saw potential. Where Jason followed the family mold, business school, corporate law, country club weekends, I had chosen photography and social work. A life, my father once said, of emotional charity. It was Eleanor who supported my decision to pursue art, who framed my first black and white photo and hung it in her hallway, who whispered to me in her last lucid moment, "Make it yours." She meant the house. But maybe she meant more. By mid-afternoon, my lawyer called back. Ashley, your parents filed a motion to contest the will. They claim Eleanor wasn't in her right mind when she amended it. That's ridiculous. She was sharp until the end. She signed it in front of witnesses. It's a tactic. They're stalling. They change the locks to assert control, betting you won't fight back. Then they don't. Know me. I found a cheap motel 20 minutes away, the kind with flickering neon signs and curtains that never quite closed. I lay on the creaky bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the last night I spent in that house. My grandmother had dozed in the recliner. I had curled on the couch nearby, listening to the rhythmic hiss of her oxygen tank. That house held echoes. I wouldn't let them erase me from it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal filings, court dates, and sleepless nights. My parents' attorney claimed Eleanor had been manipulated, that I had undue influence during her final months. Jason, to my shock, submitted a statement supporting them. I confronted him. "Why are you doing this? You know she wanted me to have the house." His eyes were cold. "You manipulated her, Ashley. You took advantage of her condition. You weren't even there. You didn't call, didn't visit. You abandoned her. And you swooped in to claim the prize." The prize. That's what it was to them. Not a home, not a legacy. Just real estate, a valuable Victorian in an up-and-coming neighborhood. I walked away from him that day, shaking. But I also felt something I hadn't before. A quiet resolve. I would prove them wrong. To build my case, I had to prove the will was valid and that Eleanor was of sound mind when she signed it. I tracked down the nurse who had been with us that week. I found the notary who had signed the documents. I submitted emails, letters, even video messages my grandmother had recorded. It was exhausting, but necessary. And in between, I rediscovered pieces of myself. My photography had taken a backseat for years, but I picked up my camera again, photographing families for free, capturing real moments of love and tension, joy and exhaustion. It reminded me why I started, and I began dreaming about the house. Again, not just as a place to live, but as a space for others. A community gallery, a safe haven for kids with no creative outlet, a legacy my grandmother would be proud of. 2 months after that first day on the porch, we had our court date. My parents sat stiffly at one table, their lawyer whispering in low tones. Jason avoided my gaze. My lawyer presented our case with quiet precision. Then he played a video. On screen, my grandmother sat in her study, gray hair pulled back, eyes sharp. To my granddaughter Ashley, she said, I leave this home, not just because she cared for me, but because she sees its worth beyond market value. Because she sees me. Silence followed. Even my father looked shaken. The judge ruled in my favor. The house was mine. I returned that evening, new key in hand, breath held as I turned it in the lock. This time it clicked. I stepped inside. The air smelled like lemon oil. And time. I closed the door behind me, leaned against it, and wept. Not from grief, but from coming home. The silence in my grandmother's house was heavier than I remembered. Every room, every corner echoed not just her memory, but the tension that now strangled it. I sat in the old parlor, the one she used, to call her thinking room, clutching a mug of now cold coffee, trying to collect the shattered pieces of my trust. Leah's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Ashley, this isn't just about property. They tried to erase you. You need to fight this. I know, I said softly. But they're my family. No, they were your family. There's a difference. That night, I called Sophia Brennan, a well-known family and estate attorney. I remembered her from a seminar I'd attended years ago. She had spoken with clarity, fierce intelligence, and something I'd always admired, calm rage. Within 24 hours, we met in her corner office, glass walls overlooking the city, files stacked neatly in crisp folders. She listened intently as I laid out the entire chain of events. She didn't interrupt, didn't glance at her phone. When I was finished, she leaned forward, laced her fingers, and said, They thought you'd stay quiet. They're about to learn otherwise. Sophia wasted no time. She requested a full copy of my grandmother's will from the county registrar, began an emergency injunction filing to freeze any potential transfer of ownership, and hired a private investigator to retrieve deleted communications. Within a week, we discovered a pattern, a timeline of correspondence between my parents and a group of developers. They'd been planning this long before my grandmother passed. Worse, they had falsified documentation to imply my grandmother was mentally unfit in her final weeks. But Sophia found something I hadn't known existed. Your grandmother recorded her meetings with her estate lawyer. All of them, she said, holding up a small USB drive like it was a grenade. And in those recordings, she not only confirmed her full mental capacity, but expressed concern that your parents might try to contest the will. Listening to my grandmother's voice again after so long cracked something open in me. She spoke clearly, firmly, even with warmth. Ashley is the heart of this house, she said in one clip. I trust her to protect its spirit, and I want her to have it, not Robert and Helen. They'll sell it to the first bidder. It was more than just evidence. It was validation. We filed the motion for an injunction the following morning. Sophia's team moved like a tactical unit. Every box checked, every document watermarked, every signature notarized. When the papers were served to my parents, I received a short, cold text from my father. You've made a huge mistake. I didn't respond. That was the first time I chose silence over confrontation, and it felt powerful. Jason, my brother, texted 2 days later. Can we talk? I didn't know they were going to do all this. I ignored it at first. The betrayal felt too raw. Too big, but I eventually agreed to meet at a neutral place, a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. He looked tired, worn down by something more than guilt. I didn't know the full plan, he admitted. I knew they were angry, but I thought it would blow over. Then Dad changed the locks and said you'd come around eventually. I stared at him. You didn't think to warn me? Jason, I got off a flight and couldn't get into my own house. He sighed, raking his fingers through his hair. I froze. I didn't know how to pick a side. You did, I said evenly. You just picked theirs. He didn't argue. Meanwhile, the court granted a temporary injunction. They couldn't sell or alter anything about the property. My parents' attorney responded with a barrage of demands, discrediting my claim, suggesting I was emotionally unstable, that I hadn't visited my grandmother enough. Sophia tore through their arguments with surgical precision. She was my shield, my sword, and, without even trying, my anchor. Emotional instability? She scoffed, flipping through the papers. You're the one who cared for your grandmother in her final years. Their arguments are as weak as their conscience. A week before the first court appearance, I returned to the house, with legal permission, to catalog what had been taken or altered. Leah came with me, along with an official from the court and 2 police officers to keep things calm. What I found broke my heart. My grandmother's photographs had been removed from the walls. Her art books gone, her journals vanished. They had gutted the soul of the place, as if trying to scrub out any trace of me or her. I walked through each room, pen in hand, documenting the losses like crime scene evidence. In the attic, I found something they had missed, a locked wooden box tucked behind old holiday decorations. It was filled with my grandmother's letters. To me, some she had never mailed. Others were ones I had sent her, which she had kept carefully, bundled in blue ribbon. I sat on the dusty floor, reading one after another, the tears silent and relentless. You've always been more than just my granddaughter, Ash, one letter read. You're my mirror, my legacy. Don't ever let them make you doubt what you're made of. I didn't. The first court date arrived, and with it, the ugly truth. My parents took the stand, painting a picture of a confused elderly woman and a manipulative granddaughter. They claimed the will was altered under duress. They even suggested my grandmother was suffering from early dementia, a claim easily dismantled by medical records and her estate lawyer's sworn testimony. But it was the recordings that changed everything. Hearing my grandmother's voice, calm and resolute, saying, Ashley understands the heart of this home in a way Robert and Helen never could, sent a wave through the courtroom. Even the judge paused, looking at my parents with thinly veiled contempt. Sophia leaned toward me during a recess. We're winning, she whispered, but don't celebrate yet. They'll try to settle. That's what people like them do when they start to lose. She was right. The next morning, we received an email from my parents' legal team. Subject: line, we have a problem. The message asked for a meeting to discuss settlement options in light of recent developments. Translation: they knew the game was up. I stared at the screen, adrenaline and disbelief warring in my veins. Sophia grinned. They don't know what else we have. Let's keep it that way. 2 days later, we met in Sophia's conference room. My parents arrived with their attorney, Mr. Baxter, a man whose expression was that of someone who had lost control of the narrative. My parents looked diminished. My mother's usually flawless makeup couldn't mask the exhaustion in her eyes. My father, once proud and domineering, seemed smaller somehow. Jason sat beside them, but wouldn't meet my gaze. Baxter opened the meeting. My clients are prepared to return all items removed from the property and formally acknowledge Miss Parker's ownership. In exchange, we ask that she drop all additional claims and agree not to pursue criminal charges. Sophia didn't flinch. That's not even close to acceptable, she said. My client has suffered significant emotional, financial, and reputational harm. We can discuss compensation, reasonable compensation, but she's not walking away quietly. Then she played one of the recordings. It was a short clip, but devastating. I don't want Robert and Helen near the house after I'm gone. My grandmother's voice rang clear. Ashley will understand. She always has. My mother gasped. My father's face turned ashen. Baxter called for a recess. When they returned, the tone had changed entirely. Their proposal now included full public retractions, return of all items, a formal apology, and $50,000 in damages. We countered. They accepted. When it came time to sign, my mother looked at me and said, "Ashley, this is still your family." I met her eyes without flinching. "You filed false police reports. You tried to ruin my life. This is what family looks like to you." They signed. And for the first time in months, I breathed freely. Later, as I stood outside the building, Jason approached. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something earlier." "You should have," I said. "But you're saying it now. That matters. We didn't hug. We didn't pretend it was all okay. But for the first time, there was a crack in the wall between us. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something new." The legal victory felt surreal, but it didn't erase the damage. The court had ruled in my favor. The house was legally mine. Again, and my parents had formally retracted their accusations. Yet something in me had shifted permanently. Like the internal scaffolding I once leaned on had been torn down and replaced, brick by brick, with something more self-made and raw. When I first stepped back into the house, not as a visitor or defendant, but as its rightful owner, there was no celebratory music playing, no film-worthy tearful homecoming. Just silence and a faint scent of lavender from the sachets my grandmother had tucked in drawer corners. The house felt wounded, too. I walked slowly through every room. The parlor, stripped of its charm, the dining room bare of the delicate china she used only for special guests, the guest room, mine during college breaks, now cold and impersonal. But it was the attic, where I had found her hidden letters, that beckoned me most. With gloves and patience, I cataloged every forgotten box, every paper. I found old black and white photographs of my grandmother with friends, a velvet-lined jewelry case with trinkets that had no monetary value but carried the weight of memory, and a series of paintings she had hidden away, some unfinished, some heartbreakingly raw. Each brushstroke felt like a window into her private grief, joy, and resilience. Inspired, I decided to restore the house not as a living space, but as a community gallery. One dedicated to families, real families with all their imperfections and contradictions. The gallery wouldn't just showcase art, it would tell stories, stories of reconciliation, betrayal, healing. It would be a space to reflect what we are. Grandmother had taught me that truth is not always clean or comfortable, but it is necessary. Leah was the first to support the idea. "You're not just healing yourself, Ash. You're building a sanctuary for others." And I needed that sanctuary too. As I began renovations, I found the rhythm of solitude oddly comforting. There were moments of grief, yes, but also peace. I no longer felt compelled to prove myself, not to my parents, not even to Jason. He reached out again, asking to meet over lunch. We sat in the courtyard of a small cafe, the autumn breeze tugging gently at the napkins. "I wanted to say more at the mediation," he said, "but it didn't feel like the right time. You still chose silence." "I know," he said, "but I didn't agree with what they did. I was scared. Dad has always been ruthless. When he's convinced he's right, he'll bulldoze anyone." I sipped my tea. "And Mom?" Jason hesitated. "Mom follows, always has, even when it breaks her." A flash of my childhood surfaced, watching my mother rearrange the living room, the way Dad wanted it, even after spending days designing it herself. Her dreams were always deferred. "I think she believed she was protecting the family," Jason added. "No," I said. "She was protecting herself from him. And if that meant sacrificing me, she made peace with it." He nodded slowly. "You're probably right. Jason wasn't the enemy. He was collateral damage in a family that valued reputation over relationships. I saw now how deeply that hierarchy ran, how often he had been forced to play mediator, pretending neutrality when he was actually just paralyzed. "Come to the gallery opening," I said finally. "It's a celebration of truth, of everything we don't talk about in families like ours." He looked surprised. You'd want me there? I'm not building this to hold grudges. I'm building it so we have somewhere to put them down. He nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of brotherhood return to his eyes. The opening of the Parker House Gallery became more than just a personal milestone. It became a symbol. The local arts council featured it in their newsletter. A home reclaimed the Parker House story. Invitations were sent out. Neighbors who had known my grandmother came to share stories of her laughter, her gardens, her sharp wit. Strangers wandered in and stood silently in front of portraits that whispered of abandonment and rebirth. One installation in particular drew a crowd. It was titled Inheritance, a mixed media piece constructed from torn family photographs, burnt legal documents, and my grandmother's handwritten recipes layered behind fragments of broken window glass. People stood for long minutes before it, some weeping, others silently nodding, as if the piece had named something they'd never said aloud. Later that evening, as I refilled wine glasses and answered questions about curation, I saw Jason walk in. He looked overwhelmed, taking in the crowd, the photographs, the soft light bouncing off gallery walls that once held childhood memories and holiday arguments. He approached me slowly. "This is amazing," he said. "She'd be proud." "I think she already is." He handed me a small wrapped box. I wasn't sure if this was appropriate, but I found it among her things, stuff Dad didn't touch. Inside was a photograph. My grandmother holding me as a baby, both of us smiling. On the back, in her cursive handwriting, "She is my reason." Tears burned in my eyes. "I kept it," he said, "because I didn't want them to throw it away." We stood in silence for a moment, the crowd murmuring around us, the scent of roses from the front hall mixing with the distant sound of a string quartet playing in the background. Then Jason said something I never expected. "I've started therapy. I'm trying to unlearn a lot, especially about loyalty." I nodded. "Me too. But on the other side of unlearning is truth. It's hard, but it's worth it." He left before the night ended, but not before promising to return. With his wife and daughter next time, a start. Later, I sat alone in my grandmother's old reading room, now converted into a small reflection space, softly lit and lined with quotes from writers, poets, and thinkers. One quote glowed softly in gold leaf above the fireplace. "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Maya Angelou, it was a quote my grandmother loved, and now it was the heartbeat of the house. The Parker House Gallery became more than I had envisioned. It was no longer just a tribute to my grandmother or a response to betrayal. It was becoming a living, breathing testament to truth and transformation. Each new exhibit added a layer to its story, to my story. Families came and lingered, leaving handwritten notes in the comment books, some thanking the space for letting them feel seen, others sharing pieces of their own pain and healing. But the deeper healing, the kind I didn't dare speak of out loud, was still personal. I was learning to live again without proving myself, without defining my worth through resilience. I had survived, yes, but survival had once felt like armor. Now I wanted softness, stillness, a life that didn't require me to constantly fight for my space in the world. That shift began with a conversation I never thought I'd have, with my mother. It was late spring. The dogwoods were blooming, and the scent of lilac drifted from the gallery's courtyard into the house. Jason had texted me earlier that week. "Mom wants to come. I didn't invite her," she asked. I didn't know what I felt. Cautious curiosity, maybe. Not hope. I had stopped hoping for repair long ago. But I said yes, because I didn't need an apology anymore to move forward. I just needed to face the shadows fully, without flinching. When she arrived, she looked older, smaller somehow. Time had done its quiet work, etching deeper lines around her eyes and mouth. She stood just inside the threshold of the gallery, clutching her purse with both hands like a shield. I walked over, keeping my expression neutral. "Hi, Mom." She gave me a polite nod. "The gallery is beautiful," she said, voice quiet. your grandmother would have approved. It wasn't an apology, not even an acknowledgement of the years of silence, of her betrayal during the property lawsuit. But it was something, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the wall she'd built. "Thank you for coming," I replied. She wandered the space slowly, eyes lingering on certain photographs, ones that showed multi-generational families, some joyful, others strained. She paused at the inheritance piece. Her gaze flickered over the burnt legal pages, the shards of glass, the hidden recipes. Her expression didn't give much away, but her fingers twitched slightly at her sides. I stood beside her in silence. "Is your father well?" I asked, the question more courtesy than concern. She glanced at me. "Managing his blood pressure. The doctor says he needs to reduce stress." Her tone had a trace of accusation, as if the chaos he caused still clung to me somehow. A year ago, that comment would have curled in my chest like poison. Now, I just nodded. I let it pass like a breeze that didn't belong to me. As she turned to leave, she paused. "I know we failed you," she said suddenly, "but you did something remarkable here." It wasn't a full apology. But for her, it might have been the closest thing to confession. After they left, Jason texted again. She insisted on coming. "You handled it with grace." I stared at that message for a long time. Grace. The word used to feel like weakness. Like something women were told to exhibit while being ignored or broken. But now, it felt like power, like strength that didn't shout, didn't demand. It just stood, still, certain, whole. That night, I walked through the gallery in solitude, flipping off the lights one by one. The silence was comforting. Outside, the sky stretched ink blue over the courtyard, and inside, the shadows cast soft silhouettes across the walls. I wandered into the last room, the only one left unchanged since my grandmother's passing. Her study. It was the heart of the house, the room where she'd written letters, read poetry, scribbled notes into the margins of her cookbooks. On her desk sat the same framed quote she had always kept, slightly tilted from age. "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." Maya Angelou. I stood there for a long time. It wasn't just a quote anymore. It was the story of my life. My grandmother had left me the house, but more than that, she had left me the truth. And in fighting for this place, I had found something greater than property. I had found the quiet power of self-possession, of creating boundaries that didn't require explanation, of choosing myself even when others wouldn't. In trying to take my home, my parents had inadvertently gifted me something better, an unshakable home within myself. Months later, a small nonprofit reached out asking to feature the gallery in a documentary. The director, a soft-spoken woman named Elise, said, "We want to explore the intersection of family, legacy, and justice. Your story feels essential." I hesitated at first. The idea of exposing my family's betrayal on film felt invasive, exploitative even. But as we sat in the gallery and Elise gently asked, "What would your grandmother want people to know?" I knew. "She'd want people to know they're not alone," I said. "That being cast out doesn't mean you're broken. That family isn't just biology. Sometimes the family we create becomes our greatest source of strength." When the documentary aired, the response was overwhelming. People from across the country wrote letters. Survivors of generational trauma, children disowned for speaking up, artists whose truths were silenced. They said, "Thank you." They said, "Me too." They said, "You reminded me that healing is possible." And that, above everything, made the fight worth it. That naive woman, the one who begged for approval, who shrank herself to make others comfortable, she was gone. In her place stood someone else. Someone stronger, more discerning, and ultimately more peaceful. I had learned to distinguish between genuine love and conditional approval, healthy compromise and self-erasure, forgiveness and foolishness. So here's what I know now. If someone you love betrays you, it doesn't mean you are unworthy of love. If your own family wounds you, it doesn't mean you deserved it. And if the people who should have protected you choose power, silence, or pride instead, it doesn't define your value. Have you ever had to stand up to family for something that was rightfully yours? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story helped you feel less alone in your own family struggles, please subscribe and hit that like button. You don't have to walk your journey alone. Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest teachers. Thank you for being part of my healing by listening to mine. And wherever you are in your own story, I wish you strength, clarity, and peace.